the mountain trembles. The air vibrates with a sound that is neither thunder nor wind, nor anything that human ears have recorded before. A thick cloud envelops the peak like a living mantle, and from within it, lightning bolts cut through the darkness at intervals that seem to pulse like a heartbeat. In a few moments, a voice will resound over this desert, and the words that will be uttered will become the most influential moral code in human history. We are in the heart of the Sinai Peninsula, at some point between 1300 and 1200 before the Common Era. What happens here, at this exact moment, will shape laws, religions, civilizations, and the very definition of right and wrong for the next 3 millennia. But to comprehend the weight of this instant, one must first understand what this place was before the mountain began to tremble. It is necessary to step back a few hours, perhaps a day, and observe the setting that awaited this moment without knowing it awaited it. Before we begin, write in the comments from where you are watching. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. We continue. The Sinai Desert is not what the modern imagination usually evokes. It is not an infinite expanse of golden dunes undulating under the sun. This specific region, where tradition situates the Israelite camp, presents a brutal and austere geography. Stony plains cut by dry wadis, riverbeds that only know water during rare storms. Mountains of red and brown granite rise abruptly from the ground, their vertical faces marked by millions of years of erosion. The vegetation is scarce, limited to thorny acacia bushes that manage to extract life from apparently sterile rocks, and tamarisks whose roots plunge deeply in search of hidden water tables. The sky here possesses a particular quality. During the day, a blue so intense it seems solid. At night, a darkness populated by more stars than any modern city dweller could conceive. The atmospheric clarity of the desert transforms the firmament into a spectacle that the Israelites interpreted as the very tent of God stretched over the earth. The archaeology of the Sinai reveals that this peninsula functioned, in the late Bronze Age, as a zone of passage and refuge. Egyptian expeditions mined turquoise and copper in the western mountains, at Serabit el-Qadim, where Proto-Sinaitic inscriptions, considered by many scholars as precursors to the Hebrew alphabet, were found in temples dedicated to the goddess Hathor. Semi-nomadic tribes known to the Egyptians as Shasu roamed these lands, herding flocks between seasonal oases. The desert was not empty. It was a known landscape, mentally mapped by generations of shepherds who knew where to find water, where the goats could graze, and where the sun punished less. The Israelite camp extends across the plain that later tradition will call Er Raha, a valley wide enough to shelter multitudes. Estimates regarding the number of people vary dramatically among scholars, from a few tens of thousands to the hundreds of thousands mentioned in the biblical text. What is known for certain is that this group carried with them the collective memory of slavery in Egypt, of liberation through wonders, of the crossing of waters that opened. They camp in tents made of goatskins tensioned over acacia wood stakes, the same design that Bedouins will use in this region for millennia. The tents are organized by clans and tribes, forming improvised neighborhoods that spread across the plain like a living organism. Smoke rises from dozens of fires, where women prepare unleavened bread on heated stones. The smell of baking bread mixes with the penetrating odor of the herds, sheep and goats, that constitute the mobile wealth of these families. Children run between the tents. Elders converse in the scarce shade of the acacias. Life happens. Mount Sinai, identified by tradition with Jebel Musa, an elevation of 2,285 meters in the south of the peninsula, although other candidates exist, such as Har Karkom in the Negev or Jebel al-Lawz in Saudi Arabia, dominates the landscape. Seen from below, the mountain seems inaccessible. Its slopes are steep, covered with loose stones that make the climb treacherous. The peaks are frequently lost in clouds that seem to rest upon them like crowns. For the Israelites camped at its base, this mountain already possesses an aura of sacredness even before the events that will make it legendary. The text of Exodus chapter 19 records that God commanded that limits be established around the mountain. No one could touch it under penalty of death. Stone markers were positioned, creating a visible boundary between the ordinary and the sacred, between human space and divine space. The preparation for this moment began 3 days prior. The biblical text is specific. The people were to sanctify themselves, wash their clothes, and abstain from conjugal relations. This ritual purification finds parallels in practices of the ancient Near East, documented in Hittite and Mesopotamian texts, where encounters with the divine required bodily and spiritual preparation. The Israelites washed their wool and linen cloaks in the few available water points, likely in the wadi that cuts through the valley. The scarce water of the desert was used not to quench thirst, but for purification. This detail reveals the magnitude of the expectation. To sacrifice water in the desert is to sacrifice life. Moses occupies a singular position in this setting. The text presents him as a mediator between two worlds, the human and the divine. He has climbed this mountain before. He has already heard the voice that spoke from within a bush that burned without being consumed. The book of Exodus indicates that he functioned as an interpreter, transmitting divine instructions to the people and bringing the people's responses to God. Archaeology cannot confirm the historical existence of Moses as an individual figure, but it can confirm that the function of priestly mediator between gods and communities was universal in the ancient world. Mesopotamian kings, Egyptian pharaohs, Hittite priests all claimed this role of a bridge between heaven and earth. What the biblical text presents as unique is not the existence of a mediator, but the nature of the God who speaks through him. The third day dawns differently. The text of Exodus 19, verse 16, describes what happens. Thunders and lightnings over the mountain, a thick cloud covering the peak, and a trumpet sound, shofar in Hebrew, so loud that all the people in the camp tremble. The Hebrew word used to describe the people's reaction is sharad, which indicates deep trembling, not superficial fear, but a shuddering that reaches the bones. The phenomena described are not easily classifiable. The cloud could be interpreted as volcanic activity, although there is no evidence of active volcanoes in the Sinai during the period. The thunders and lightnings could be a high-altitude storm, common in high mountains. But the trumpet sound defies naturalistic explanation, and the text does not concern itself with offering one. What happens is presented as a theophany, a direct manifestation of the divine in the sensory world. Moses leads the people out of the camp toward the base of the mountain. The Hebrew verb used, yatsa, indicates deliberate, organized movement. It is neither flight nor panic. It is a procession. Hundreds, thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people move across the stony plain toward the established limits. They stop where the boundary stones indicate that the sacred space begins. There are no priests yet. The Aaronic priesthood will be instituted later. There is no temple. The tabernacle will be built as a consequence of what happens this day. What exists is a multitude of former slaves, shepherds, entire families, elders and children, all standing before a mountain enveloped in phenomena they cannot explain. Mount Sinai, at this moment, presents an appearance that the text describes with technical precision. It smoked, because the Lord had descended upon it in fire. The smoke ascended like the smoke of a furnace. The entire mountain trembled violently. The Hebrew word for trembling here is different from the one used to describe the people's reaction. It is an intensified sharad, a verb that indicates convulsion. The earth does not merely shake, it convulses. The ground beneath the Israelites' feet vibrates with a frequency they can feel in their teeth, in the bones of their skulls, in their very chests. The sound of the trumpet does not diminish. On the contrary, the text indicates that it grew louder and louder. Moshe yedaber, Moses spoke, Veha Elohim ya'anenu vekol, and God answered him with a voice. The temperature in the Sinai desert varies dramatically between day and night. Early in the morning, the air still carries the nocturnal chill, temperatures that can drop below 10 degrees at high altitudes. But what the Israelites feel at this specific moment is not just the cold of dawn. The text implies an atmospheric alteration caused by the divine presence. The cloud over the mountain is not common water vapor. It possesses density, weight, an almost solid quality. The light emanating from within it is not filtered sunlight. It is lightning that pulses from the inside out, illuminating the upward-turned faces with intermittent flashes. The contrast between the darkness of the cloud and the intensity of the lightning creates a stroboscopic effect that must have been disorienting, almost hypnotic. The sound deserves particular analysis. The biblical text uses the word kol repeatedly: voice, sound, thunder. In Hebrew, the same word designates both the human voice and natural thunder. This ambiguity is theologically significant. What the Israelites hear is not clearly categorizable. Is it thunder? Is it a voice? Is it something that exists between the two or beyond both? Later, rabbinic tradition will develop the idea that the divine voice divided into 70 languages to reach all the nations of the earth. But at this moment, in this original text, what is recorded is simply the sound, a sound so intense it causes physical trembling, so penetrating it seems to come from all directions simultaneously, so incomparable that the only possible description is negative. It was like nothing they had ever heard. The animals in the camp react. Flocks of sheep and goats, which were grazing on the plain, huddle together nervously. Guard dogs howl. Donkeys, the pack animals that transported belongings from Egypt, refuse to move. The animals of the desert, lizards, scorpions, serpents, disappear beneath the rocks. Birds that normally circle over camps in search of scraps are absent. The animal silence amplifies the sound coming from the mountain. There is no sonic competition, only the voice, the thunder, the shofar that does not stop sounding. Moses ascends. The text of Exodus chapter 19 indicates that God called him to the top of the mountain. The climb up Jebel Musa, if this is indeed the biblical mount, would take several hours through steep trails carved in granite. But the text does not indicate a significant passage of time. It suggests immediacy, as if physical distance were irrelevant before divine urgency. Moses disappears into the cloud. From below, the people see only the smoking mountain, the lightning, the darkness that pulses with light. They do not see Moses. They do not know what is happening up there. The waiting is part of the experience. The plain where the people wait is now completely illuminated by the lightning from the mountain, although the sun is still low on the horizon. Shadows do not behave normally. They jump, disappear, reappear at impossible angles. People's faces alternate between darkness and clarity in an irregular rhythm. Children cling to their parents' legs. Elders who survived the plagues of Egypt, the crossing of the sea, the hunger and thirst of the desert, now tremble in a different way. This trembling is not fear of an identifiable danger. It is something deeper, the recognition that they are in the presence of something absolutely other, absolutely beyond any known category. Later Jewish tradition will call this moment Ma'amad Har Sinai, the standing or the posture before Mount Sinai. The choice of the word Ma'amad is significant. It is neither event nor occurrence. It is position. It emphasizes the physical and spiritual posture of the people before the revelation. They are standing, not kneeling, not prostrate, but upright. This verticality will be interpreted as dignity. The human being receiving the divine word not as a crawling servant, but as a covenant partner. The covenant that will be sealed at this moment presupposes two sides that can commit themselves. The people are not passive recipients. They are a contracting party. The sun continues its ascent, but its light seems irrelevant before the luminosity emanating from the mountain. The heat of the day begins to be felt, but bodies still tremble with a cold that is not thermal. The smell of sulfur, or something similar associated with the smoke rising from the mount, reaches the nostrils. It is a smell that will be associated forever, in collective memory, with the divine presence. When, centuries later, incense burns on the altars of the temple in Jerusalem, part of its purpose will be to evoke this smell, this sensory memory of the encounter at Sinai. Time slows down. Minutes distend. Each heartbeat seems separated from the next by an impossible interval. The expectation reaches physical density. The air seems heavier, harder to breathe. Not because oxygen is lacking, but because the atmosphere itself is charged with something that escapes description. Lungs work, but breathing does not satisfy. The entire body is in a state of maximum alert, every nerve exposed, every sense amplified. It is as if the skin has become porous, and the exterior invades the interior without asking permission. The cloud over the mount now pulses with a faster frequency. The lightning is no longer intermittent, it becomes almost continuous, creating a constant light that emanates from within the darkness. A visual paradox, light that comes from darkness, clarity that inhabits the cloud. The sound of the shofar reaches an intensity that seems impossible to sustain, but it sustains. It does not diminish. It does not fail. It continues, louder and louder, until the distinction between sound and silence loses meaning. The sound becomes the very substance of the moment. And then, the voice. The text of Exodus chapter 20 records that God spoke all these words. Vayedaber Elohim et kol hadevarim ha'ele lemor. The verb is simple, direct, spoke. He did not scream, did not whisper, did not thunder. He spoke. The word used is the same that describes ordinary conversation between human beings, but what is said is not ordinary. Anochi Adonai Elohecha asher hotsaiticha me'eretz Mitzrayim mibeit avadim. I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. The words that follow, 10 declarations that tradition will call the 10 Commandments, or more precisely in Hebrew, Aseret Hadibrot, the 10 words, the 10 declarations, are not presented as abstract legislation. They are preceded by a self-declaration and a remembrance. The God who speaks identifies himself not by metaphysical attributes, but by a historical act, the liberation from Egypt. The ethics that will be proclaimed are grounded not in moral theory, but in lived experience. You know who I am, because you know what I did for you. The first commandment establishes exclusivity. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. In the context of the ancient Near East, where polytheism was the unquestionable norm, this declaration is revolutionary. The Israelites know the gods of Egypt, Ra, Osiris, Isis, Horus, the entire pantheon that inhabited the temples along the Nile. They know the gods of neighboring nations, Baal, Asherah, Moloch. The declaration resounding from the mount is not that these gods are weak or inferior. It is more radical. They must not exist within Israel's horizon of loyalty. The monolatry that will be required, exclusive worship of one God, will eventually evolve into strict monotheism, the belief that only one God exists. But at this moment, what is required is fidelity, not metaphysics. The second commandment prohibits images. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image. In a world where every deity possessed a visual representation, statues of gold, silver, bronze, wood, this prohibition is scandalous. How to worship what cannot be seen? How to offer sacrifices to an absence? The prohibition of images will force Israel to develop a radically different theology. A God who reveals himself through words, not forms, through acts, not appearances, through voice, not vision. This difference will mark the biblical tradition of all contemporary religions and will have cultural consequences extending to the present, in the iconoclasm of Islam, in the aesthetic minimalism of certain Protestant Christian traditions, in the very modern notion that the divine transcends any representation. The third commandment protects the name. Thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. The name, in the ancient world, was not a mere identifying label. It was an extension of the person, access to their power, the key to their essence. To know the name of a god was to have power over him, or at least access to him. The prohibition of using the name in vain, lashav in Hebrew, meaning for an empty, false, or destructive purpose, protects the sanctity of the relationship between Israel and its God. The name will be so revered that centuries later, Jews will cease to pronounce it entirely, replacing it with Adonai, Lord, or simply Hashem, the name. The fourth commandment establishes the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. The 7-day week, with rest on the seventh, is so integrated into modern human consciousness that it is easy to forget how revolutionary it was. The Egyptians did not have a 7-day week. The Mesopotamians had lunar observances, but no mandatory weekly rest. The idea that everyone, masters and servants, men and women, even animals and resident foreigners, should rest regularly was a radical innovation. The commandment connects the Sabbath with creation. In 6 days God made the heavens and the earth, and on the seventh he rested. But it also connects with the liberation from Egypt, where there was no rest for slaves. The Sabbath is, simultaneously, an imitation of God and a memory of freedom. The fifth commandment commands to honor father and mother. It is the only commandment with an attached promise, that thy days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. The transition is significant. The first 4 commandments regulate the vertical relationship between humans and God. The fifth initiates the horizontal regulation between humans. But it begins not with the neighbor in general, but with those closest, the parents. The family structure is presented as the foundation of the social structure. Honoring parents is not just a feeling. It is material provision in old age. It is public respect. It is the continuity of tradition. The sixth commandment prohibits killing. Lo tirtzak, the Hebrew verb used, ratzak, is specific. It does not designate all death, but murder, illegal, unjustified death. The same Pentateuch will prescribe the death penalty for certain crimes and authorize war in certain circumstances. The commandment does not establish absolute pacifism. It establishes that human life is protected by God and cannot be taken by arbitrary individual decision. The seventh commandment protects marriage. Thou shalt not commit adultery. The family, already established as a fundamental unit by the previous commandment, is now protected from within. Conjugal fidelity is presented not as a mere cultural preference, but as a divine requirement. The eighth commandment prohibits theft. Thou shalt not steal. Property is protected. Some scholars argue that this commandment originally referred to the theft of persons, kidnapping, based on the context and parallel references. Regardless, it establishes that what belongs to another cannot be taken. The ninth commandment prohibits false witness against the neighbor. Truth in the judicial context is protected. In a society where the legal system depended fundamentally on testimony, to falsify it was to destroy the possibility of justice. The 10th commandment prohibits coveting. Thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's house, thou shalt not covet thy neighbor's wife, nor his manservant, nor his maidservant, nor his ox, nor his ass, nor anything that is thy neighbor's. This commandment is different from all the previous ones. It does not regulate external action, but internal desire. It is the only one that penetrates human interiority, the intention before the act. Interpretive tradition will see in it the root of all others. He who does not covet, does not steal, does not kill, does not commit adultery. The 10 words resound over the desert. The people at the base of the mountain hear. The text of Exodus chapter 20 verse 18 records their reaction. Vayaru, and they saw. They saw the thunders. The Hebrew is precise. They did not hear the thunders and see the lightnings. They saw the thunders. The sound becomes visible. The synesthesia is recorded as fact. The senses fuse before that which transcends all senses, and then they retreat. Vayamdu merachok, and they stood afar off. Fear drives them away. The proximity of the divine becomes unbearable. They ask that Moses be the intermediary. Speak thou with us, and we will hear. But let not God speak with us, lest we die. The mediation that will define all the rest of biblical history is established at this moment, not by divine imposition, but by human choice. The people choose distance. The people choose mediation. Moses responds, Fear not, for God is come to prove you, and that his fear may be before your faces, that ye sin not. The distinction is subtle but crucial. There is a fear that paralyzes, and there is a fear that orients. The first must be overcome, the second cultivated. The experience of Sinai exists to implant this second type of fear, not a terror that dehumanizes, but a reverence that humanizes. The mountain continues to smoke. The cloud remains. But something has changed irreversibly. Before this moment, the Israelites were a group of former slaves fleeing through the desert. After this moment, they are a constituted nation, a people with a code, a community with a vocation. The covenant is sealed, the terms are established. History can continue. The impact of this moment reverberates through the millennia in a measurable way. The two tablets where these words will be inscribed, stone tablets, like the legal stele common in the ancient Near East, will be kept in a wooden ark overlaid with gold, which will travel with Israel through the desert, be carried in the conquest of the Promised Land, and eventually rest in the Holy of Holies of the Temple in Jerusalem built by Solomon. When the Babylonians destroy this temple in 586 before the Common Era, the ark will disappear from history, but the words contained within it will have already multiplied on parchments, copied by devout scribes, generation after generation. Jesus of Nazareth, 1300 years later, will cite these commandments and summarize them into two: to love God with all one's heart and to love one's neighbor as oneself. Paul of Tarsus, writing to the Christian communities of the first century, will argue that the law written on those tablets was transcended by grace but remains as a pedagogue, as a moral guide. Muhammad, 600 years after Jesus, will incorporate versions of these commandments into the Quran, recognizing Moses as a prophet and the revelation of Sinai as a divine act. The three Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, Islam, trace lines of continuity to this moment in the desert. But the influence is not limited to religious traditions. When Thomas Jefferson drafts the American Declaration of Independence, when the French revolutionaries proclaim the rights of man, when the United Nations adopts the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, echoes of Sinai are present. The idea that there exists a moral law that transcends the decrees of kings and parliaments, that rights are inalienable because they derive from a source that precedes and surpasses human powers, this idea has roots in this stony plain where a people trembled before a smoking mountain. The traditional site of the Revelation, the monastery of St. Catherine, built at the foot of Jebel Musa in the 6th century of the Common Era by order of Emperor Justinian, still exists. Greek Orthodox monks have inhabited it for 15 centuries. The bush growing on the monastery grounds is venerated as a descendant of the burning bush. Pilgrims from 3 religions climb the 3,750 steps carved into the rock to reach the peak at dawn. Something in this place continues to attract people seeking what the Israelites found there, a word that came from outside history to shape it. The mountain no longer trembles. The cloud no longer descends. The shofar no longer sounds over the Sinai desert, but the words remain. I am the Lord thy God. Thou shalt have no other gods. Remember the Sabbath. Honor father and mother. Thou shalt not kill. These words, spoken more than 3,000 years ago on a morning of thunders and lightnings, continue to be read in synagogues every Saturday morning, recited in churches, studied in madrasas, cited in courts, and invoked in ethical debates. They have become part of the moral genetic code of humanity. The sun is high now over the Sinai. The cloud slowly dissipates. The Israelites remain at a distance, processing what they heard, what they saw, what they felt. Moses remains on the mount, where he will receive the detailed instructions that will form the rest of the Torah. History continues. There will be the golden calf. There will be 40 years of desert. There will be conquest and exile, temples built and destroyed, prophecies and silences. But everything that comes after will be, in one way or another, a response to what happened here. Commentary, interpretation, application, rejection, reaffirmation, but always in relation to this founding moment. The code was delivered, the pact was sealed, the people were constituted, and the desert keeps the silence that came after the voice. If this documentary illuminated your understanding of sacred history, subscribe to the channel. Activate notifications. Each episode is a journey to the past to understand the present. Leave in the comments. What other biblical moments would you like to see reconstructed? Share with those who seek to know the history behind the faith. Until the next